Bill, I want to get to questions soon, but one of the things the book calls for, and I'm biased to this as a card-carrying centrist, but you call for a renewal of the political center. Explain why that is practical and necessary for this particular challenge.
Well, there's so many things we need to do. We need to move past arguing about which bathrooms our kids can use in their schools to talking about what should the kids be learning about misinformation and disinformation. How can we educate them about social media? How can we tell them that you can't believe everything you see on social media? You need to validate things. You need to have multiple sources. You need to be more sophisticated about the information you receive and then you give out. We need a political center to work on ending the digital divide in our country, where many people don't have access to high-speed internet. This is not a liberal or conservative thing. We need people who are fully versed in writing code. We need people who are trained and be able to operate computing systems. Our educational system is also not adapted to the internet era. So we need major improvements in our educational system, which is a scene of great cultural wars right now. The cultural wars are preventing us from developing unified responses to, and so as long as we have the cultural wars and the bitter political divisions, our ability to respond and take actions that will defend ourselves is limited.
And indeed, as you point out, our cultural wars are being exacerbated and exploited by our adversaries via this broader definition of cyber war.
Right.
I want to make sure we get time for questions because there are a lot of smart people in here, and I think you also had a question for someone in Japan.
Well, I'll just tell you what it was. Tokyo,
It's cutting out the middleman, but okay.
The Tokyo Arataki, my friend in Tokyo, who I believe is watching, asked the question that Chinese are penetrating Japanese media, Japanese companies, Japanese government. The Chinese are moving into Japan in big numbers. How can we in the West defend ourselves against the presence of so many Chinese who, many of whom believe in their adopted countries, and many of whom are playing for the other side? So he's asking us, what is our response? What can we do about that? And do you have an answer for him? I'll give you an answer. My answer is we have.
You have a great answer. Go ahead.
We have 3 to 4 million Chinese Americans, and so we have a bad history in this country of the Japanese internment during World War II, which made it necessary, but it wasn't well done. Of the Chinese Exclusion Act, of the McCarthy era. Chinese American community is concerned that if they acknowledge that there are people who are living among them who are playing for the other side, that will result in a backlash against all Chinese Americans, all Asian Americans. So it's a very sensitive issue. I think that we can persuade the Chinese American community, large parts of them, like the Committee of 100, that help us identify these different patterns of Chinese activity that are deleterious to American well-being, and we will reward you for that. We will guarantee your status in our society. We will not turn this into a witch hunt, unmitigated and undifferentiated witch hunt. We need your help. So Chinese Americans who have some language experience, not many Chinese Americans don't speak Chinese.
Sure.
Who hate the Communist Party, they're fifth generation, they have no interest in ever going back. Other Chinese, so there's quite a broad spectrum. So I think we need to find a way to communicate this message and help us identify patterns of activity that are negative, and this will not result in pogroms against all Asian Americans.
So, I hope to God that shouldn't even need to be said, but yes. All right, 6 questions from the audience.
So, I'll take one of the microphones and you guys can.
Oh, yeah, great, good idea.
You guys call.
Raise the hand. Come on. Not in a journalist.
Peter Gardner, I see Peter Gardner, see John Jesse.
How about John?
I'm just curious about what you think about the weather balloon and shooting it down and how does that kind of espionage play into this?
Well, as a hot button. When it happened, I assumed that the Chinese were exploiting near space, an area above 60,000 feet, where Americans, we don't pay much attention to that space. We have satellites that are 300 miles up, and we have commercial aviation, it's 38,000, 40,000, maybe military planes at 50,000, but above that, there's a gap we don't pay much attention to. It appeared to me that the Chinese were exploiting that near space and had deployed a balloon that must have been overflying military bases in Hawaii and Alaska. And then let's say it was blown off course. It flew over other American military bases before it was shot down. So General Miley, just in the last 48 hours, has come out and said, we now know, we assess with great certainty that it was not gathering intelligence as it flew over the United States, was not transmitting anything back to China. I find that really hard to believe. If I were a Chinese intelligence guy and could be flying over the United States, I would be using it for everything it's worth, and I would be extracting data from it as fast as possible, because what are the chances that you're ever going to recapture a balloon flying over the United States, headed for the Atlantic Ocean, headed out? I mean, what are the chances that you'd ever be able to recapture that and gather that? I think that it's a hot political issue. And if the American military and the Biden administration acknowledged this balloon was flying over and gathering sensitive military information about what frequencies does the American military use to communicate. I mean, think of the shitstorm that would erupt in Washington, the Republicans would pass. So I fear that there's a kind of denial of the truth happening. I can't prove it. I obviously don't have the detailed inside knowledge, but I smell a rat. So Mike, what is your theory?
So I would just say, first of all, it's not the first time it's happened. It's the first time it's been publicized. Second, the fact that the Chinese balloon flew over the entirety of the continental United States is pretty brazen on the part of the Chinese. And I think that alone shows the fact that they are in a state well beyond just competition with us. They are doing things that are much more brazen, much more in your face than they had been previously. And I think that tells us a little bit about their psyche, tells us a little bit about what their leadership thinks of our political leadership and our political will to respond. On the intelligence collection side, think about Starlink. Think about Viasat. Think about where these low Earth orbit satellites are that are geocentric, that are able to provide Wi-Fi to areas that otherwise wouldn't have it. And so you're able to project a Wi-Fi connection down into receivers from just right above where that balloon was flying. So to tell me that it wasn't collecting anything and that it wasn't doing anything but flying over the United States, I think is far-fetched, especially considering all of the strategic military bases that it just so happened to fly over that are all communicating via SATCOM. And so whether they were able to collect anything of value, meaning non-encrypted communications, we can't say one way or the other. What I can say is that if they did collect even encrypted communications, those encrypted communications are going to go into a database which will be able to be cracked very soon by a quantum